If not, I'll go to the audio recording. I'll just do an audio recording. Hopefully this will work. What page are we at? We're on
About the middle of chapter.
page 468.
And what does that correspond to in
In the days of the month, it corresponds to the 17th of Adar.
or 6th of Adar too?
2, exactly.
Yeah, okay. I was in the right place.
You know, let me just okay, let's go here so we can see. Okay. So far we're live.
If anybody tries to come in and watch online, right?
I do. Sometimes I do, but that's I can't do it. No. So right now it is going through Zoom, but last week it stopped in the middle. So we'll see what happens.
Now,
It lasts.
Zoom it records.
So through Zoom, I could record it to YouTube without actually going into YouTube.
Ah, okay.
Okay. So they tell the story of 2 souls. One was on its way down and one was on its way up. So the one on the way down wants the scoop. What are they getting into? So the soul on the way up tells the one on the way down, it's amazing. With a few dollars, you could fulfill God's command. You could be commanded by God to do something, and all it takes is a few dollars, and you could fulfill the commandment. So the soul says, wow, it sounds amazing to be there. So he says, yeah, but until you work to get the few dollars to do the mitzvah, your soul can depart your body.
Especially inflation.
Yeah. That's the joke part of it. But seriously speaking, which soul is closer to God? The soul that's sitting in God's presence that's on its way down, or the soul that just spent 120 years or 70, 80 years in this world doing mitzvahs and on its way up?
I think the one doing the mitzvahs on its way up.
You think that because it makes sense to you, or because you know a little bit about what we talk about, and you imagine? No, why? So why? Why?
Because he has the 168 years of being close to God. Not
Yeah.
a new soul coming down that hasn't had to deal with the animal soul and.
But the new soul was sitting in God's presence for eternity.
Yeah, but all souls are sitting in God's.
But when the soul's in the body, it's not. It's sort of, well, God's everywhere, but it's not experienced. Correct, but it's being held captive in the body. It's not able to express itself and experience godliness the way the soul sitting in heaven does.
But
every once in a while it does. And
every night, God gets it back.
Correct.
And puts it back.
Right, but compare that to a soul that just lived for eternity with God, that just spent. So which one do you think is closer to God? You're right, by the way. I'm just trying to understand why you think. Why.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I just thought that because it had to actually work to be closer to God. The one up with God didn't have to do anything.
Okay, very good. That's so you have to work for this. It's not free lunch. It's worked for, and therefore it said in the Talmud, the person would rather have 1 measure of cucumbers that he grew in his own garden than 9 measures that his friend gifts him.
Right.
Okay, so okay, that's very good. Yeah, you.
I would have mirrored.
You concur with
what they would say.
Very good.
Exactly.
So
The words right out of your mouth.
That's hard.
So I want to take this for a moment and just point out, play devil's advocate for a second. What you both suggested, which is absolutely true. However, the question was, which soul is closer to God? In other words, which soul experiences God closer? And I think when someone is gifted 9 measures of cucumbers versus someone who grows their own measure of cucumbers, if I asked you who has more cucumbers, you'd have to agree that the one who was gifted 9 measures has more.
Right.
Okay, they may not be as tasty to him. They may not be as precious to him. He may not want them.
But he didn't have to work for him either.
Right, 100%. That's correct. But at the end of the day, who has more cucumbers? The one who was gifted.
Right.
So when we ask the question, who is closer to God, I'm not asking who feels closer, who feels more precious, who feels more fulfilled or accomplished, but who is actually closer to God. And you might think that if I pushed that question, the answer would be the soul coming down. However, you're still correct. The soul is down here. But we have to understand why. Why is it that the soul down here can actually be closer to God than the soul actually? There's no physical space. But imagine that the person sitting next to you physically is actually further than the person sitting physically further from you. It can make sense if the person sitting next to you is someone that doesn't want to talk to you and doesn't like you, and the person sitting, the next person over is your child who wants to spend as much time with you as possible. So you would, it makes sense to say the person sitting next to you, although he's next to you physically, is really not next to you, even though physically he's next to you. So this is sort of where we're headed, that the soul tells the soul coming down, the soul going up tells the soul coming down, if you take an animal, slaughter it, take its skin, and make tefillin out of it, you could reach a closer connection to God than actually being in heaven. If you imagine you're the soul coming down that never experienced a physical mitzvah before, you'd probably be in shock. What do you mean? I'm going to connect to God through taking animal skin and wrapping it on my hand once a day? Makes no sense.
But what does make sense,
Yeah,
is that the soul coming down is in a position where they have to work for the experience. They have to work to put the tefillin. They have to work to do a mitzvah. I mean, it's something that the soul in heaven doesn't have to do.
let me ask you, so the soul in heaven should want to come down or not?
I would think so.
In,
I would think so. Yeah.
I want to ask you. I want to ask you honestly. Not now when you have the benefit of hindsight, when you have the benefit of looking back. But when you were 20 years old and you had to start working, would you have rathered? Would you have preferred to be given a stipend for life or to work to earn the same amount of money? At that time, when you were a teenager,
I started working when they allowed me to. I was 16.
the day before,
But I wanted to work. I cut grass. I did all kinds. I worked
why?
because it was fulfilling.
Yeah.
I really did
So-
something, and
So
I
you
got
didn't.
money for doing something.
So if you would have gotten that amount of money every month as allowance for doing nothing, would you have? Do you think you would have still persevered and gone through the career you would have gone through?
I now get nothing. I get paid for nothing. I'm doing nothing.
Yeah, but you're not getting paid for nothing.
But no, I'm not. It's a pension, but it's pretty close to that idea. You know, I was in the grocery store yesterday, and the two women that were blocking the whole aisle. Not that they were blocking the whole aisle, but you know, they make the aisles narrow and then they put stuff in the middle, so
Yeah.
nobody could get around. When I said, "Excuse me," and they nicely moved over. And one of them made a comment. I don't remember what she said, and I said, "No, I'm retired. I don't have anything else to do." But and we kept running into those two women. I mean, constantly at every aisle, running into them. But the point that I'm making is that if the day before you go to work is not much different, not much different than what I do now.
That's not the question. My question is today, if I were to, you eloquently said at the beginning that you'd much prefer to work for what you get than not to. That's not my, but I'm going a little differently. I'm asking you, if you were to be asked before you started working that you would get paid the same amount, you would get the same, like you work, you got, let's say, a $10,000 paycheck at the end of the month, you would get $10,000 deposited into your bank account every month. Do you think you would still work as hard, as long, as much as you did during your lifetime if you didn't get paid after doing the work? You got paid because your parents paid you, or the government paid you, and all you did, the only reason you worked was to feel fulfilled. Do you think you would have worked as much and as hard or at all in your lifetime?
Let me answer it this way. The last 40 years of my life, I was teaching, and I was in a profession that I absolutely loved.
I know, but I have to stop you because we're being recorded. We could extend the conversation afterwards. I think anything you say about the last 40 years is irrelevant to this question.
Okay.
The question I'm asking specifically, because that we already addressed at the beginning, I get that. I'm asking specifically if you were not, before the 40 years, before you worked a day, if you were asked, would you prefer to work to get paid, or would you prefer to get paid without working? What would you say?
I would prefer to work. And I did.
Okay, I think so.
Very much like Jay.
No problem. If that's the, yeah, but Jay didn't answer that. Jay said he probably wouldn't have worked,
No,
or wouldn't have worked as hard.
No, because
If you didn't get a paycheck for your work, you would still work.
my parents gave me an allowance.
1 minute.
That's the same thing, okay? But I didn't care. I wanted to work.
I know.
So I went out and
If
cut grass.
if you,
sold greeting cards.
you know, let me phrase the question differently. If you didn't get paid for cutting grass, did you ever cut grass for people you didn't get paid for on a regular basis? Or would you cut grass if you didn't get paid for cutting grass?
Oh, yeah, I did. I had certain people, the old people on the block, I cut the.
Young
grass for
people,
them and I
if
never
you
got paid.
if you never got paid for cutting grass, would you
They
cut
tried to pay me and I wouldn't take it.
that? That was, yeah, but fine. See, but that's the big difference. You didn't take it. That was more fulfilling for you than taking it.
Right.
My question is, would you have cut grass? Would you have bought a lawnmower and cut grass if you didn't get paid for cutting grass? As a rule, you didn't get paid. Would you go out and just cut people's grass, not getting paid for it?
Well,
Okay, if you answer yes to that question,
No.
then you're the anomaly.
no,
Most people wouldn't.
because I cut grass at the beginning. Then I figured, hey, they're gonna give me $1 to cut their grass. The kid across the street, I give him 50 cents. He brings his lawnmower, cuts the grass, and I made 50 cents. And all I did was schedule it.
No problem. Again, all of these things you're saying, all of these calculations you're saying, all start from the framework that you're looking to get something at the end of the day. My question is, at the end of the day, if you grew up 10 years old and you knew that you never had to work a day in your life, no matter whether you worked or not, you would not get paid for your work. Payment comes because the food, there's burgers and waffles that grow on the tree outside. Your clothing grows in your drawers. You don't need to pay money for anything. Would you, if you didn't need money, would you go out and work the way you did during your life?
I don't think so.
I don't even think so.
Because
Now, does that mean you wouldn't work at all? Does that mean you wouldn't go to the gym? We do things all the time that we don't get paid for. I'm not saying we wouldn't do anything. But if you're the soul coming into this world, where you come from, you don't work. You're just sitting in God's presence. And you're told that when you come down here, in order to connect to God, you're going to have to work hard. Would you make a U-turn or would you continue coming down?
Before or after the one going up, so this is a really great experience.
Yeah.
Before or after that?
Before you come down.
After.
After?
After?
Yeah.
When you talk,
Straight down. Because
you're talking about two people who spent their life trying to build a career, build a thing, get to where they want to be and love what they
I
did.
understand. I'm asking you to put yourself in the shoes of how you were before this long career as a soul coming down. When you were a child, did you have the same did you, in other words, let me ask you a better question. Were you looking forward to the day you would retire? If you answer yes to that question, then that means you prefer not to work.
No, I did look forward to it.
I'm not saying you prefer never to work, but in a certain sense, you would look for an easier way to live than by working hard every day. If not, you wouldn't retire.
Yeah, no, I retired. I waited 3 years for her till she turned 65. But otherwise, if it wasn't because of her, I would have kept working because I had a job. I didn't have to do physical stuff. You know what I mean? So it wasn't a physical thing. I had to show up every day and do things.
So you're saying that she forced you to retire?
She didn't force me, but
She talked you into it.
Yeah, I.
Blame it.
If I wanted to retire, I wouldn't have waited until she's 65 for her. I would have retired at 65 and then she would retire when she
You-
was 65.
No, so you're saying, now you're saying the opposite. Now you're saying that you worked more for her. That you would have retired earlier. Before you said you would have never retired.
Well, I would have kept going, you know what I mean?
So you got it.
What I did.
Okay.
I love this.
So I'm suggesting that and by the way, if you want to make it even more comparable, I would say that why do you love, I would ask you, why do you love working? For the fulfillment you get out of it, right? Let me tell it to you, let me ask it to you this way. If you could get the same fulfillment somehow, if you can accomplish the same fulfillment by not working, would you do that?
Probably.
Probably. That's what that's what I want to get to here. The soul is before the soul comes down into this world, the soul's sitting in God's presence. What does the soul find out is exciting about this world? That it has the opportunity to put on tefillin and become close to God. The soul says, no, thank you.
Want to be closer.
Exactly. No, thank you. I could stay up there. I'm close to God. What do I need to work hard to do a mitzvah when I'm close to God? That's the point I wanted to get to.
And up there.
And you understand this idea, this question.
Up there,
Okay, whether it fits exactly to your life,
Yeah, I think we're probably.
every parable.
we're unusual, but.
No, but I think
But up there, also, you didn't have to fight the animal soul. In other words, you're in a constant battle.
Let me-
Come down here.
let me say it different. I apologize to the not apologize because I think this is an important conversation because I think it clarifies. But we're going to extend this just a drop. So I don't know how many of you have heard this from me before, but when we go to a cemetery, one of the things we make sure is that our tzitzis that are usually hanging out, we tuck them in. You've heard that from me before.
Yeah.
Do you remember why?
Yeah, not to embarrass
Not to embarrass the people.
Oh, so
Embarrassed. It's so that they don't feel bad that they can't do the same.
very good. So in a way that's embarrassed. In a way that's embarrassing. In other words, you're right. It's not exactly embarrassing, but it's why is someone ashamed? Why does someone get embarrassed? Usually because they're made to feel less than, or they're right. So in a way, it's the same thing. But you're correct in articulating the reason that it's all the term that's used in halacha is like it's like laughing at the dead. That look, I could do a mitzvah and you can't. And the commentaries all wonder what does that mean? Who's laughing at who? The dead should be laughing at us. Their souls sitting in heaven enjoying God, and we have to wear these wool and cotton strings to become close to God while they're sitting and seeing God. And we don't even see God. We just do the mitzvah and we believe that we're connected to God. They get to see God. They're laughing at us. Why is what? So in other words, we want to understand here the point, the place we're trying to get to is that we want to understand. Last week we gave the example of a candle. That a candle has the wick, the oil, and the flame. The flame is God's presence. The wick is the body, and the flame and the oil is the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs help us connect to God. But why do we need mitzvahs to help us to connect to God? Don't we have a soul? Why isn't the soul considered oil? Let me ask it to you this way. Have you ever heard someone ask the question, or have you ever asked the question? Why isn't it enough to be a Jew in my heart? Why do I need to put on tefillin, or to eat kosher, or to keep Shabbos, or to shake the lulav? I believe in God, or even I feel Jewish. I feel a strong connection to Judaism. I feel a strong bond to the Torah, even if I don't go and do this silly little details and rules. I'm a Jew in the heart, and I could probably show you many Jews that put on tefillin every day, and I'm more honest than them, and I'm more Jewish than them in my heart. I'm more passionate. I do more outreach and advocacy for Judaism than the person who does the mitzvahs. Or the tzaddik. The tzaddik is this purified, perfect person. Why does he need to still do mitzvahs? He has this beautiful connection to God. He doesn't even have an animal soul anymore. Why does he still have to abstain from eating non-kosher? The non-kosher is not going to affect him. He's a tzaddik. In other words, why do we need mitzvahs to be the fuel that allows God's presence to rest on us, to be with us? Why isn't that enough? We have a soul. A soul's a piece of God. Why isn't this peace of God that we all possess enough to be the fuel for the flame of God that's within us, that we want to be in this world and around us?
Yeah, it's, okay. If I go a whole year, if I would go a whole year and not give any tzedakah, I will give nobody a penny.
Yeah.
I have a lot of extra money,
Correct.
but Carol and I struggle because we can't give as much as we used to. When we were working, oh, didn't matter, thousands of dollars, who cares? Now we can't do that. We could, but that means we don't have a life at all because we couldn't go on trips, couldn't do anything because the money is not like it was. But I can't go without giving. Like, it's like we now have a list and we go through and filter out, give them and them, you know, and we found that we seem to have drawn into more Jewish organizations that we give money to. But that's not totally true either. We give to all the children's hospitals because to me, saving a child is so important that I have to help.
You just touched on something that is, I think, key to understanding my next point. I actually have a story that's very similar to that. However, before we get there, I want to point out why you have this struggle and where it comes from. Like this. But before we get there, we have to understand what is a soul, what is a mitzvah, and why one accomplishes something different than the other. But let's go back to the parable of the candle. What makes something fuel? What allows something to be fuel for a fire?
It's combustible.
Oh, no, the wick. Without the wick, it can't be a fire, even though we got tons of.
So if I put a wick, if I embed a wick in a rod of steel, is the steel fuel? Okay. If I embed a wick in a blanket, is the blanket fuel? No. What allows something to be fuel to a fire?
It's combustibility. It can.
What is the definition of combustible mean?
It burns.
It is consumed entirely by the fire.
Yeah.
Okay, so the steel is too tough. It has its benefit that it's very, very tough and can never be consumed. But at the same time, because of its benefit that it can't be consumed, it also has its drawback. It can't be used as fuel to fire. Okay, so in order for something to be fuel for a fire, it has to be consumable. In other words, it has to, although you see something, really what you're seeing is nothing independent. It's only a tool for something else, and it could become totally nullified. It could be totally consumed within the flame. Now, last week, I think someone mentioned a wick also is consumed in the fire. Yeah?
Yeah.
But what's the purpose of the wick? To be consumed?
No.
What happens if the wick is consumed too quickly?
The fuel can't get to the fire.
The fuel goes out.
It-
You like the match. If the match burns too quickly, the match is useless.
Yeah, you burn your fingers.
Oh, it's useless. So the purpose of the wick is to stay as long as possible. And on the contrary, if you're looking for a long candle, what are you going to do when you see the oil starting to go out? You're going to add more oil because you want the wick to last as long as possible. So in our case, the body is the wick. We want the body to last as long as possible because we want the flame to burn as long as possible. So we want to give the wick as much fuel as we can. Now the question is, can the soul act as fuel? Can I be a Jew in my heart? Is the soul enough?
Yeah.
And the way to know the answer, so you answer no, you're correct. But how do we determine that? How do we find that out? The question is a soul consumable? Can a soul be consumed?
I don't think so.
Why don't you think so? You're right. Why don't you think so?
Because God gave you the soul as his connection to you, and therefore you need to give back, and that's the thing. But he didn't give the soul to you to be used up.
Well,
Well, maybe he did. How do you know?
you said earlier,
Yeah,
you talked about the eternal soul,
yeah,
which means the soul was not created.
to be consumed.
Well, it wasn't created. It was
Oh, it was
always been.
correct, correct. Yes, yes,
Like God is.
yes,
Yes. Because otherwise you get caught up in a great circle.
Correct.
And you can't get out of that circle. So if it's eternal, it can't be consumed.
Okay. So you're saying practically why it can't.
Yeah.
And you're right, you're both right, it can't. But we can see this from the Torah. We say Shema every day, right?
Yeah.
What after you say Shema, what's the opening verse of the paragraph following the verse Shema? Via hafta. What does that mean? In English. Say it in English. How does the Shema start in English? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. What's the next?
Yeah.
What's the next verse in English? Afterwards, V'ahavta. In English, you don't say you never say it in English. You shall.
First paragraph, I never.
You shall. You shall
You shall.
love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind.
The commandment.
You forget.
Now,
Too.
when I tell you or I tell my child, I love you. And I don't just say it, I really feel it. And I'm willing to do everything for my child. Is that an expression of me or is that a diminishment of me?
No expression.
It's an expression. You know how I can, now you'll say, yes, but I love my child so much, I'm even willing to die for my child. Okay, that might be a diminishment of me. But love, it usually doesn't express itself that way. On the contrary, sometimes love can be so overbearing, the child doesn't want your love. They don't want you to come to their school. They don't, you're too overbearing. Now, you don't mean it that way. You're doing it as an expression of love. So why is there a conflict? Why sometimes I love my wife so much that I do something, she says, stop, please. Or go do something you don't want to do. There are two things. There's the expression of love, and then there's the act that the person who is loved wants from you. What happens? Not always do they go together. Sometimes your loved one will ask you to do something, and you may love them to the world, to the end of the world, and yet you're not willing to do it for them. So what happened? You have to be reminded. You go to marriage counseling and you go to marriage therapy. You have to be reminded. You love this person so much. Start forgetting about yourself from time to time and listen to what they want from you. In other words, your love can actually be an impediment to the union of two people. Why? Because in order to have a union, you need to have nullification. You can't have two people. If you have two people, you don't have unity. You have to lose something of yourself in order to become one with someone else. And when you feel love passionately, you feel yourself more. I once heard, I think Rabbi Friedman, he said, when your wife tells you, I love you, don't say, I love you too. That's not nice. You're changing the subject. She said, I love you. Say, thank you. Saying, I love you too is changing the subject from, she's talking about her love to you, and you change the subject. You say, by the way, I'm not responding. I love you too. You want to make sure she knows that you love her. It becomes all about all about.
There may be a little subtlety.
Even a game that we came up with, we has two eyes. You know the Wii game? It's spelled W-I-I.
Yeah.
Two eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it depends on how the person says I love you.
Yeah.
Is it Susan has this habit of ending a phone call with anybody. It doesn't make any difference who it is unless they're strangers, with I love you. That's a very casual thing.
Correct.
And but if it
And even between spouses, it can become casual.
It can. And so I don't think that
No, you're right.
would apply. But
Correct.
if it's a real emotional outpouring,
Yes.
yeah, it absolutely would change the
Right.
subject.
In other words, she sits down and sort of unburdens herself or is vulnerable and puts herself out there and says that, and the husband says, I love you too. totally missed the ball, totally missed the point.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And therefore, when you really love someone, what do you always have to remember? You always have to remember it's not about what I want, it's about what they want. And when you're going to the store to buy something for them, when you're first married, it's a little, in a way, it's a little easier, it's a little harder to get something not that you want, something you know they want. I always give the example of flowers. Unfortunately, it's not something that I've kept up or that I think about often. I don't go to the store as often as well. But I used to be quite religious about buying flowers every week. Unfortunately, I'm not. But it was very difficult because to me, it was a waste of money. I didn't see the beauty in it. I didn't understand it. And for $10 or $15, I could buy you 5 bars of chocolate that you'll actually enjoy for the next 3 weeks every day. And I may get to enjoy some of it too. And the flowers, even if you enjoy it, I don't get to enjoy it. Obviously, this is all childish ways of thinking, but in your mind, it's an expression of love to buy you something that I want to get you. But here again, we see how love is an expression of me. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe will even say the biggest tzaddik is still not nothing. He's still something because he loves God. And as long as there's a he who loves God, there is something separate from God. It may be very, 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 very small in its separateness, but it's still not one with God. And we're going to see the opposite soon in mitzvahs. But let's first read a little bit inside. Yes.
Going back to whether the soul's used up. The soul can't be used up because every night.
Not used up, consumed.
Consumed.
Yeah. Used up.
Every night, God takes it, fixes all your screw ups, fixes it, puts it all back together, and you get a fresh new soul in the morning. It's the same soul, but it's like refurbished soul.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it was meant that the soul could be consumed, why would God need to fix it and make sure it doesn't get consumed?
Correct.
So
yeah, that's another way you see that. Very good. Let's see here a little bit inside. The meaning of this analogy, comparing the light of the Shekhinah to the light of a candle, is clear to every intelligent person. That's what, as the Alter Rebbe will conclude shortly after a closer examination of its details, just as it is true of the candle's flame. Okay. That it does not shed light, nor is it retained by the wick without oil. Everyone understands this and knows this. Similarly, the Shekhinah does not rest upon man's body, which is compared to a wick in the Zohar, as we discussed last week, 2 weeks ago, except through man's performing good deeds. It is evident from the Zohar, however, that one's soul, although a part of God above, is insufficient to serve as oil for the wick. And Alter Rebbe says, but the reason for this, the Alter Rebbe now concludes the sentence that he begun earlier with the words, the meaning of this analogy. The meaning of this is clear and understandable to every intelligent person. So this was like a little parenthesis. The meaning of this is clear to every understandable and intelligent person. Why? For the soul of a man, even if he be a perfect tzaddik, who serves God with fear and with a pleasurable love. In other words, his love consists of delighting in the experience of godliness, which, as we'll learn in later chapters, is a most lofty form of love. There are many levels of love, many levels of fear. The most basic fear is fear of punishment. But the highest level of fear is an awe of God, a tremendous fear that the minister would have before walking into the king. It wasn't the fear of punishment necessarily. It was just an awe of standing in the king's presence. So there's many levels of love, there's many levels of fear. Even a tzaddik who's at the highest level of love, 1 minute, let's just finish the sentence, is nevertheless not utterly nullified out of existence, so that it might be dissolved into and absorbed within God's light, to be merged with it in perfect unity. It is rather a separate entity, which fears God and loves God. Since it is not absorbed within godliness, as oil is absorbed within a flame, the soul cannot serve as oil for the light of the Shekhinah.
I have always had a problem with the word fear
Yes.
because I don't look as fear and awe to be the same thing.
Correct.
Okay, so I remember sitting in a Bible study class, a Christian Bible study class. And the big difference, they would say, the Jews fear God, we love God. That was their typical, and I don't do mitzvahs because I fear God. Maybe it's because of my definition of fear. I do mitzvahs because I respect and awe God. To me, that's totally different than fear. And
Right. But the word
hated the word fear.
correct, but the word in Hebrew is called yira. It's the same word. It's the same word, which is why it's translated as fear. I'll give you, and I just gave sort of an example, but when you walk in to the CEO's office, okay, and I don't know if it's your specific company or your specific CEO, but imagine a CEO that, or imagine a CEO of your a company that's very prestigious, okay, or has a beautiful palace, and you're going for an audience for an appointment with him. Now, you're not afraid of him because you've had enough appointments with him, and you've he's not firing you. He's looking to glean some information. You're not scared, but yet before you walk in, you might have butterflies in your stomach. You can call it awe, but biologically that creates the same biological effect as fear. It's not a fear of some reprisal or punishment, but it's still the emotion of fear. You have fear. In other words, it's not you may not be in fight or flight mode, but it's still, again, in now, even in Hebrew.
Well, you actually are there because those butterflies are from adrenaline.
Okay, perfect.
Which is
even better. Even better. But you're in Hebrew, when later chapters, when we actually discuss emotions, we're going to give the emotions names. We're not just going to say fear. We're going to the fear it comes with different attachments to it. But the most basic level of fear is actually fear. When you start educating kids at the very beginning, and the same might be true when you're starting observance of mitzvahs, the very beginning, the way they know if they don't do it, there's gonna be a punishment. You don't want adults to be doing things out of fear of punishment. You don't want to be putting on tefillin because you're scared God's gonna put you in hell. Of course, you don't want to do that. But if you're a person that never put on tefillin, you really want to, you can't get yourself to do it. The first step would be learn about hell, get yourself scared stiff. You're going to start doing it every day. As if you're looking to do that. It's the most basic level of fear. Are we advocating that Jews should be scared of God like you're scared of as if God's holding a gun at you? Of course not. But if that's a necessary element to get you to do a mitzvah, why not? Why not? It's a tool. Just like you use it to train the horse or train the dog or train the kids. If a lollipop works, good. At a certain point, the lollipops don't work. Kids will say, okay, I don't want the lollipop. Then you have to start using the stick, not literally, figuratively, or maybe literally sometimes, if necessary, right? Yeah. So fear is not in Yiddish you'd say it's not a treif word. We're not scared of fear. We're not scared of using fear of God, but at the same time, we want to realize that fear of God. When you're working, when a tzaddik is working to have fear of God, it's not that type of fear that we're sort of scared of God's punishment. It's a fear. It's an awe. It's called yiras haroimimus, fear of the loftiness. That's not fear. That's awe of how lofty God is. But in Hebrew, it's the same word because it comes from the left side. It's the same sort of category of emotions, and that's why it has the same name. And by the way, love is also totally very different than the Christian type of love. As we'll see, again, we'll see in the next section of Tanya, the last 15 chapters or so are dedicated to discussing love and awe of God because of mitzvahs. In the next few chapters, we're going to say mitzvahs is the be all end all of everything. So afterwards, Al Tareb is going to say, okay, so what are our emotions for? And what are emotions? And what are the emotions? So the last 15 chapters are going to be all about emotions. There, I think we'll get to a deeper understanding of these different levels of awe, of love and awe. But I think the point here is that Al Rebbe made is that any person, even the highest tzaddik, because they're called upon to love or fear God, in other words, they're not consumable because they love. So I said before I wanted to share a story with you similar to the point you mentioned. There was once a very wealthy, by the Alter Rebbe, one of his chassidim was very wealthy, very big philanthropist, gave a lot of tzedakah. And as they say, the world is a wheel that turns. And just because you're on the top one day doesn't mean you'll be on the top forever. And just because you're on the bottom one day doesn't mean you'll be, because the wheel turns, the wheel spins. And one day he lost everything and he was broken. He wasn't broken because he was poor. He was broken because now he couldn't do as much good as he could before. And now he owed people money that he couldn't pay back. He wanted the money not for bad or selfish reasons. Yeah. So he came to Alter Rebbe, asked Alter Rebbe for a blessing. And he was like complaining, what did I do to deserve this? And why did God do this to me? And what does he want from me? So when he finished, he was expecting Alter Rebbe would bless him with wealth again. Alter Rebbe paused for a few moments, and Alter Rebbe said, everything you said till now was all about what you want. But you didn't mention anything about what you're wanted for. And he fainted. And he was taken out. And he turned his life around, whatever that means. I don't know what that means here. But Hasidim would share the story and always ask the question, why did he faint? It's a simple question. The Alter Rebbe was pointing out to him, all you did here was tell me what you need. You didn't tell me anything that you do, you didn't speak about the mitzvahs that you do or the things that your money is used for. You didn't speak about what you're needed for. Maybe start focusing on that and stop focusing as much on what you need. Why is that? Why would that bring someone to faint? Why would that create such a loss of oxygen that like the chassid lost himself? Why would that evoke that? If we think about, based on the little bit we just explained, me wanting to give tzedakah, that's not, that's my soul speaking. That's me. What I'm needed for, the mitzvah, that's not me. If I'm called upon to do something I don't believe I'm capable of doing, and because I'm called upon to do it, I go and do it, and I'm successful, was that me? Or was that my ability to nullify myself that allowed me to actually accomplish it? In other words, if I thought about me, I would, and accurately so, think I'm not capable of doing this. I wouldn't even try to do it. But because I was called upon to do it, I put myself aside. I forgot about me for a second. Because in the moment, I believed I wasn't capable of doing it. But I put myself aside, and I did it anyway because I was called upon. That's the mitzvah. So why am I doing the mitzvah? Am I doing the mitzvah because I want to, or because I'm being asked to? Now, it's very important to note, I'm not suggesting you should stop wanting to give tzedakah or stop wanting to do mitzvahs. Okay? I'm just pointing out that when I do something because I want to do it, it's an expression of me. So what happened here to this chassid? Alter Rebbe says, you said everything what you want. What about what's demanded of you? This chassid right now was what he heard Alter Rebbe saying was, right now your whole life revolves around you. Maybe your life should not revolve around you and should revolve around God. You know what happens in that moment when you want to ask someone to change who their life revolves around? You're asking them to make a paradigm shift. You're asking them literally to kill one part and resurrect into another existence. That's that. If a chassid really hears that and really takes that in, he's going to faint. He's going to lose his touch with reality, because this is a reality in which he lived for so long that Alter Rebbe is telling him, you can rise above this. You can live a different reality. And in that reality, I gave tzedakah because God gave me the money to give tzedakah. Now that God didn't give me as much money to give tzedakah, okay, now I can't. But it's not about me. Last year I gave $20,000. This year I can only give $10,000 because God gave you only $10,000 to give this year. Maybe He gave you, because He gave you $10,000, that means you're not working anymore. Maybe He gave you more time to study Torah or to help other people. I prefer to work and give tzedakah than to study Torah. Again, it's because it's all revolving around what I want. And this isn't the bad thing. This is how God created us. All we're showing here is that if you're going to trust your soul to dictate what you should be doing, even if you may be living a tzaddik life, even if you may be living a righteous life, you would be living a selfish life, an egotistical life. And you may actually not be doing what God wants you to do. And I can use myself as an example, not because I'm a major, but I was studying in yeshiva. There was nothing that said I couldn't continue studying and go teaching and continue to study Torah for the rest of my life all the time, not have to worry about the fundraising and paying bills and then making events and programs. Just study Torah for the rest of my life. I could have even gone into outreach and gone to an established Chabad house to be a Torah lecturer. That would be doing what I want. For whatever reason, this is where God brought me. Even if I don't enjoy a lot of the things I have to do, but if the days that I manage to remove myself from the equation, it doesn't affect me as much. The days I can't, the days I'm more full of myself, are the days I'm less likely to do those things that I'm uncomfortable with, that I don't particularly enjoy. So now, till now, we focus on how the soul is not fuel. The soul, because the soul is not consumable. The soul has a self. What about a mitzvah? So what do we say before we do any mitzvah? Say a blessing, right? What are the first, not 6 words of the blessing, because the first 6 words of the blessing are the same words we say at the beginning of every blessing, even not a mitzvah blessing. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. What are the next words, next 4 words that we say before every blessing we make on a mitzvah? Before you light candles, before you put on tefillin, before you hear the shofar, before you read the Megillah, before you shake the lulav, before you Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Who has sanctified us with His mitzvot and commanded us. There are thousands of details in the mitzvahs. Where do all of those details come from? God's command. So when you go buy flowers for your wife and you think it's a waste of money, but she asks you to buy flowers, and you think it's a waste of money, you'd much rather write her a love note or buy a beautiful card and add your interpretation. In your mind, that's money better spent. It's a better expression of your love because it's something you feel for. Buying flowers is something you despise. Whereas writing a love letter, that's an expression of your emotions. But the flower is something she asked for. What's going to be fuel for the fire for unity between you and your spouse? Writing her the love letter or buying the flowers. Writing the love letter is going to be like spitting in her face, saying, I don't care what you want. This is what I want.
It's all about you versus it's all about her.
Now, the ultimate is to have both. Why can't you buy flowers and write a love note?
Yeah.
Fine. But right now we're talking about where someone he's not in that mode. He's not in that type of place. He's thinking either or, and he's choosing. And that's why you have people, Jews, that will choose. They'll do the mitzvahs. They can't be bothered with studying Torah and with thinking about God. And They're simple people. And then you have people that are all into the esoteric part of Judaism. They can't be bothered with the mitzvahs. Why can't you do both? Of course you can do both. We should do both. But it's much easier for people to align themselves in one. It's very hard to be both a feelings person and an action person at the same time. It's much easier to either be focused on actions, do, or feelings, feel. So therefore, it's easier for us to operate on an either or plane. The best of both worlds, go to shul every day and daven with passion. Yeah, but that can take me 4 hours if I do it. I won't be able to work. Okay, so once a week, do it. But the hour you do have on a regular day to daven, should you be thinking and feeling emotions, or should you be putting on tefillin and saying the words? If you can only do one of them, you can't do both. Because if you put on tefillin and say the words, you're not gonna be able to think and feel so much. And if you feel and think so much, you're gonna mumble and forget half of the words. Can't do both at the same time if you're limited on time. So which way is the flame of God present in this world? Where is there oil for the fire? The mitzvah. Because the mitzvah is consumable. The mitzvah is not about me. The mitzvah has nothing of itself. Every element of the mitzvah is what God wants. Every element of the mitzvah is fuel for the fire. The fire doesn't want wicks. The fire wants oil. What happens if you give the fire tons of wicks? Burns out. The fire doesn't care about wicks. What does the fire want? The fire wants oil. The fire enjoys a good smelling oil, an oil that burns nicely and purely. Even gasoline once in a while, a fire enjoys. The fire doesn't like metal because the metal contributes nothing to the fire. God doesn't need, not God doesn't need. Well, again, we have 15 chapters talking about why God still needs my heart and God, why my emotions are still important. But if we're looking at the most basic level, at the either or, God doesn't need what you're feeling. If God would want what you're feeling, he would have told you, I want what you're feeling. God wants to do. And that's why he said in the Torah, do it. Why couldn't I find a wife that actually enjoys chocolate more than flowers? That's a good question. Maybe we could have found a God that likes my heart more than he likes my actions. But at the end of the day, God, we went into a relationship with a God that he actually, unlike our wives or our husbands, that very rarely actually tell us what they want. They expect us to figure out what they want. God actually told us exactly what he wanted. 613 commandments with thousands of details. He didn't spare any ink to tell us what he wanted. A whole code of Jewish law, 14 books of Maimonides. It takes a lifetime to learn what God wants. God didn't leave anything unsaid. He told us exact details of what he wants. Anytime we do one of those details, we're not doing it because we want to do it, or we couldn't care less about wrapping tefillin around their arms. I'd much rather sit out in nature and meditate on God than sit and wrap tefillin on my arms. But if I'm looking for fuel, for the fire of God to rest on my body, to rest with me, to rest in this world, I need fuel. I don't need steel or souls. I need fuel.
Okay, so if you light candles on Friday night,
yeah,
that's a mitzvah, and you say a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
If you give tzedakah, that's a mitzvah, but you don't say a blessing.
Very good. This is a question that all the halachicists addressed. Why don't you say a mitzvah on giving tzedakah? For now, we'll suffice with that when you give tzedakah, there's no limit to what to give to be considered tzedakah. In other words, when you light candles, there's a defined mitzvah. I lit the candles, that's the mitzvah. I put on tefillin, that's the mitzvah. You can give less than a penny's worth, and it's also tzedakah, but you can't say a blessing on something that's so minute. Like when you eat matzah, and you make a blessing on mitzvah matzah, you have to eat a certain amount of matzah to fulfill the mitzvah. If you don't eat a certain amount of matzah, it's a blessing in vain. Because the blessing has to land on something. Tzedakah has no limit. Max, it has no limit minimum. Now, you should give a minimum that someone can benefit from, but technically, if you gave someone something, so for example, today, if you give someone a penny, there's nothing they could do with that penny. There's no food they could buy with that penny. So is that a mitzvah? Of course it's a mitzvah. But is that a mitzvah that you can make a blessing on? Not necessarily, because it's not anything that can benefit the poor person. So where do you draw the line? And if I give 5 different people tzedakah in 5 minutes, does the same blessing apply? So it's a lot, it's complicated, but this is a discussion that's addressed, and it could be there are some blessings and prayers we say during prayer that actually go for the tzedakah we're going to do during the day. But again, that's a separate thing. But you're right, there are certain mitzvahs that are there are certain mitzvahs we do that there is no blessing for it, that we can't define and make a blessing on.
Is
The
it,
love of God. You don't make a blessing for the love of God, even though it's a mitzvah. It's one of the 613 mitzvahs.
well, there's a whole section that says, these are the things, there is no measure.
Yes.
Even the crops at the end of the field.
Yeah, but that's no measure max.
Right, no measure max.
Right.
But is there a minimum?
Yeah, there has to be something that the poor person can benefit from.
Right.
It has to be something minimum.
You don't say a blessing for.
Sure you do.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. It's a mitzvah, you say a blessing. Of course. Well, it depends. It depends what. If the things that you forget on the floor, how could you say a blessing for that?
Right.
But it's all, every morning we say a blessing on the Torah that we're studying. We say a blessing for. Now, there's one mitzvah. It's another fascinating discussion we don't say a mitzvah for. When someone gives up their life for God, in other words, if someone's given the option, bow down to the idol or the sword, and they're killed because they're Jewish, it's a mitzvah. It's one of the 613 commandments. You don't make a blessing for that. Why not? What happens if your life is spared? It was just a blessing in vain.
Yeah.
Even though you were ready to make the blessing, you were ready to do it, you were willing to do it, but you didn't do it. Okay, anyhow, so there are certain mitzvahs you're going to find that don't have blessings, but almost every mitzvah that's actionable in a certain sense has a mitzvah like this. Oh, but before I read it inside, I just want to connect this to something, an interesting story in the Talmud, and then we'll conclude. The Talmud has a discussion: what's greater, if someone does a mitzvah and they were commanded to do the mitzvah, or if someone does the mitzvah even though they weren't commanded to do the mitzvah?
I think if you do a mitzvah and weren't commanded.
Oh, so for example, women are not commanded to do many of the positive mitzvahs that are time bound, and yet today many women do them. Like listen to the shofar, shake the lulav. Many mitzvahs that are time bound, women aren't obligated; they do it anyway. Is that greater than the men who are obligated to do it, or not as great? So the usual assumption is it's greater if you're not commanded. It shows a bigger devotion. It shows a. And Rav Yosef, one of the Talmudic sages who was blind, and there are certain mitzvahs that the Torah specifies and says you have to see it. Like tzitzis, it says you should see them and remember them, the commandments. So is a blind person obligated to wear tzitzit? So there are many mitzvahs that a blind person is actually not obligated to do because the Torah limits them to sight. So Rav Yosef said, if someone will prove to me that a blind person is exempt of mitzvahs, I will make a big feast because I'm blind. And if it's greater to do a mitzvah, if you're not commanded to do it, then I get a greater opportunity than everyone else because I can do mitzvahs even though I'm not obligated to do it. Then he said, later on in his life, he changed his mind. And he said, whoever can bring me proofs that it's greater to do a mitzvah you were obligated for, I'll make a feast. Why? He realized what we're learning in Tanya. Why does a person do a mitzvah if they're not obligated to do it? Because they want to do it. In other words, it's an extension of them, of the ego. If you're commanded to do it, so sometimes you do it because you like it. I'm not saying you can't involve ego, but because you're commanded to do it, you have the ability to do the mitzvah in a way that transcends ego. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to tell someone who isn't commanded to do the mitzvah, don't do the mitzvah. Of course, it's commendable to do a mitzvah even if you're not commanded to. But if you had the choice to choose to be the person that's commanded to do the mitzvahs or to choose to be the person that's not commanded to do the mitzvahs, who would you rather be? The person that's not commanded and do them anyway, or the person that's commanded? If you have an opportunity to connect to God, because this is a selfless opportunity to do something your lover wants that you have zero invested interest in, you'd want to be commanded. In other words, when I buy flowers for my wife, I would rather, the ultimate would be where she would actually ask me to buy the flowers, or I would somehow be able to read her mind and know that she wants the flowers, as opposed to me trying to see what might elicit her reaction. Because if I know what she wants, either because she's expressed it to me, either explicitly or implicitly. But she's then, even if I'm not in the mood, I'm going to do it anyway because I know she wants it. But if I don't know she wants it and I'm not in the mood, I might not do it because it revolves around me. It's my ego. Which is why, although this isn't maybe politically correct, it's why in the morning prayers we have 3 blessings. One of them that says we thank God for not making us a Gentile. One for thanking God not making us a slave. And one, we bless God for not making us a woman. It seems a little derogatory. First of all, to Gentiles, to slaves, and to women. But what are we saying when we say that blessing? We're thanking God for giving us the opportunity to do a mitzvah. A Gentile has only 7 mitzvahs. So we're thanking God for not making us a Gentile. A slave has many more mitzvahs. A Jewish slave, a non-Jewish slave that becomes a slave of a Jew converts. They have many mitzvahs, a little more than women, but much less than men, much less than adult Jewish males. So the next step is to thank God for not making us a slave, because we have more mitzvahs than slaves. And women who have the most mitzvahs out of those 3, we have a special blessing for not making us a woman, not because there's something wrong with a woman, God forbid, but because God gave us more opportunities to do a mitzvah. What does a woman say instead of that blessing? So in Chabad, many of the customs, we just don't say anything. Because again, the whole purpose of saying the blessing is for thanking God for giving you all the mitzvahs you got. A woman doesn't have to say anything. As a woman, we don't say thank God for making me a man. If we really didn't like women, and that's why we said thank God for not making me a woman, we should end thank you God for making me a man. We don't say that. Why? Because that's not the point of the blessing. The point of the blessing is to thank God for giving me, not taking away some of the mitzvahs I could have. A woman says, thank God for not making me a Gentile because she has more mitzvahs than a Gentile. Thank God for not making me a slave because she has more mitzvahs than a slave. And now she gets to serve God. She doesn't have to say another blessing. Some wanted to replace the blessing because you're supposed to say 100 blessings in a day. So so many communities, the women say, thank God for making me the way you wanted me. In other words, she's saying, even though maybe I would want to have more mitzvahs, but I recognize that want to have more mitzvahs is a selfish want. So I'm thanking God, you wanted me to have less mitzvahs. Thank you for making me that way. Now, technically, an Israelite could say, thank God for not making me, a Kohen could say, thank God for not making me an Israelite, because a Kohen has more mitzvahs than an Israelite. Fine. But maybe an Israel, for whatever reason, we don't go further than that. Today, most of the Kohen's mitzvahs aren't applicable anyway, or many of them aren't applicable. Either way, but there's a major difference here between a mitzvah and a soul. A soul, although it's godly, was given a distinct identity, and it was commanded that this identity should love God, should fear God, should study Torah, should do mitzvahs, but it should remain a distinct identity. And that's why, when maybe we'll see next week, Aaron's 2 sons that died by bringing foreign incense, Hasidus sees it as they reached a very high level that their souls couldn't handle their body anymore. Their souls were consumed into God. And that's why it's considered a sin. Even though it's such a spiritual accomplishment that their soul left their body because it's sort of consumed into God, but that's not the purpose. That's not what God created us. God created us that the wick should be alive for as long as possible, that the soul should remain a distinct identity. So what do we have to use as fuel? Mitzvahs. Let's see these few lines inside, and then we will conclude for today. In the middle of page 470, not so with mitzvot and good deeds. In other words, in comparison to the soul, mitzvahs and good deeds are different. They are which are God's will, each commandment representing God's desire that a particular act be performed. Now, God's will is the source of life for all the worlds and their creatures. They live only because God so desires. The difference between the divine will expressed in mitzvot and that same will as expressed in creation lies in the latter's descending to them by means of many contractions, tzimtzumim, and by concealment of the countenance. In other words, the internal aspect of the supernal will, with only the external, superficial aspect of God's will expressing itself in creation, and through a descent from level to level. In other words, if mitzvahs are God's will, the world is also God's will, right? But the world conceals godliness, whereas a mitzvah reveals godliness. When you put on tefillin, you're more in touch with God than when you go out and mow the lawn, right? Or take out the garbage. All these steps were necessary. In other words, God created the world and everything around it. It's external will. What does it mean it's external will? It was needed to serve a different purpose. All these steps were necessary so that it would be possible for the worlds and creatures to come into being and to be created ex nihilo as separate entities without becoming nullified out of existence, as mentioned above. This in chapter 25, we had a lengthy discussion about this. Without the previously enumerated forms of concealment of godliness, all created beings would be so completely nullified before the divine will that created them that they would have no independent identity. Thus, the divine will expressed in creation can come about only through its seeming contraction, occultation, and descent. Basically, the point is that if God wanted mitzvahs and he didn't create a world, all he did was created people and tefillin and Torahs. He wouldn't get people, tefillin, and Torahs. He would get just extensions of himself. In order to create separate entities that can do mitzvahs, he had to create a world, many worlds, a galaxy, a universe, with all of these things that conceal him. So all of these things that were created are also God's will, but they're sort of the external will. He did it to serve another purpose. What is his internal will? His internal will is that a Jew should do a mitzvah, or even a non-Jew, but that a mitzvah should be a commandment, something that he wants should be done. Your spouse has different asks of you than he does of the utility worker or the Amazon deliverer or the cleaning lady or the dog walker, right? But she has a relationship. We have a relationship with all of them. God has a relationship with every human he created. But God has different missions, different purposes for each one. The non-Jews have 7 mitzvahs that they were obligated. The Jews have 613 mitzvahs that they were obligated. Each was given specific instructions. The mitzvahs, on the other hand, are the internal aspect of the divine will. There, the countenance is not hidden in all. For on the contrary, mitzvot are the underlying purpose, the inner aspect of will of creation in its entirety. Let's just finish till 18 Adar. Because the mitzvot represent God's true inner will, and because in them there is no concealment of this will, unlike the case in creation, therefore the godly life force within them is by no means a separate entity, but is united with and contained within God's will, and they, the mitzvot, are truly joined in perfect unity with God's will. Kosher food and tefillin don't have an ego. My soul has an ego. And therefore, the mitzvahs are the fuel for the godly fire in me and not my soul. My soul isn't sufficient to be fuel for the fire.
You probably told us this before.
Yeah.
And I probably forgot. Why the dates in the margin of each of the different?
Oh, because the Tanya is one of the daily studies that's divided, like in the daily study app that you have, one of the daily studies is Tanya divided through the year. But because it's divided through the year, there's a leap year and a non-leap year have a difference of a month. So there's 2 different ways to divide Tanya, either in a 12-month cycle or a 13-month cycle.
7th of Adar and 6th of Adar too.
Right. So that would be an indication for which Tanya to say on any given day. So this is for someone who studies